All right. Hi, everybody. This is Lindsay Ruiz here. I'm super excited. This is my second live session. I appreciate the audience and the supporters that joined me last week when we spoke to Dr. Cynthia Matthews regarding dark personalities in the workplace. That's a really fun conversation. So I liked it so much that we're going to do it again, but now with a really, really important figure in my career, my life, my trajectory as a professional, and also in the profession of organization development, my friend, Dr. David Jamieson. Welcome, Dave. So glad you're
Hi.
here.
Nice to see you again. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm very excited, Dave, because we've been talking about doing this conversation for a very long time now.
Yep. Yep.
So I'm excited that we can use some of the newer, capabilities on LinkedIn to get together and finally, crack down the topic of organization development, which I know, like I put in my invitation, it's a little bit misunderstood. I feel like it's like the middle child sometimes
Yep.
of
Yep.
the applied
Yep.
behavioral sciences.
That's right. That's right.
So I'm super grateful. Dave, I want to share a little bit of an introduction for you in terms of my tribute to you. I think
Hmm.
it's important people know, you're a distinguished scholar and practitioner in the OD profession. You've been practicing for a very, very long time. You're a
Hmm.
professor at the graduate level. You are a massive researcher. And you also work with organizations, leaders, and organizational systems as a whole, and have seen the transition of so many different eras in the
Hmm.
organizational life all
Hmm.
the way until today that we're now in the at the tipping point of everything becoming AI powered. And I cannot be more proud of having you in my corner and be a friend of you, but also have learned from you a lot of what I know about OD. So thank you so much for giving me some time and for being here and for being a part of my life.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed every minute of working with you. You've always taken in things, and you've done fantastic work yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. I also want to recognize for the people listening that we are going to have a cross generational, cross racial, cross cultural conversation. I think we
Hmm.
represent a lot of the spectrum when it comes to diversity. And I think this is really exciting because it kind of brings to life the possibility that we can commingle and that we can exchange points of view
Yep.
and continue to co-create the possibilities for what is change, what is transformation, and how it's supposed to work in organizations. So I think that's something special between us.
Yep. Yep. That's good. That's good. I love it.
Okay, so let's kick us off. You have a signature quote that in every class that I've seen you teach, you bring up almost the first class, which is the one with the largest view wins. I want to start there. I think that's an
Okay.
important lesson learned, and you have a really cool story behind that quote. Can you tell
Yeah.
us more about that?
Yeah, I do. First of all, it happened in the '90s, late '90s, when when people were doing, and I used to be driving on the highway a lot, and I used to be reading all the stickers people had on the back of their cars, and they were always these little statements for this and statements for that, and there was one that had something to do with what makes somebody the best, having more of something made something the best. And I began to think about, by the late '90s, I had already worked with maybe 50 clients, and they were all had different leaders. They were all different size organizations, but I kept having difficulties, with the fact that there weren't that many great leaders that I was working with. There was leaders who were getting by, and they were using a whole lot of metrics to live on. The human side, they weren't that great at connecting with their people and stuff, and I could see that even back then. And I knew that some of the work we were doing was trying to improve that, but sometimes they were the main barrier to it. And so when I finally started to meet a few leaders who I thought were just outstanding, And you could tell how much the people in the organization appreciated having them as leaders. And that's when I said, what was it about those leaders that made a difference? And the more I got to know them, here's what I found out. The leaders who understood their whole system, the leaders who weren't so addicted to the channel they came up in, whether it was finance, marketing, or engineering, sometimes they got to the top and they stayed very connected to that particular perspective rather than seeing the larger picture. So that is exactly when I first wrote The One with the Largest View Wins. And I was speaking about the leaders that I was working with. And I started to really believe that. And then I've now used it in a broader ways. I've used it for organization development people as well. I still think the one with the largest view is the one who wins because they see the large picture. And so besides leaders now, I think that's the other way in which I think about it. And in all of the use of self work I do, the same thing is true. Until we understand who we are, until we understand and have our own awareness and our own feedback coming in where we actually understand how we impact people, that's the largest view we need to be the best self we want to be. We can use it anywhere. But that was the
I
purpose.
really, yeah, I think that's a very wise point of view, because one of the things that are sometimes difficult to navigate in an organization is maintaining the different angles, right, in which an organization is behaving, and all of the different parts and things that are happening in real time. And there's a lot of conversation about organizational alignment and how do we bring people together. And it's kind of hard when you have a narrow vision as
Yep.
opposed to when you're really trying to understand the larger scope of what
That's right.
else is impacting, right?
Right. That's right. And
It's
and and I feel bad about it because I think a lot of people have learned in some course something about systems. When they actually get to work in organizations or a department, they sort of lose the systemic thinking process. They're not
Mhm.
looking at what's really happening around the organization. And that's why I think we have so many silos. Silos are a big problem in organizations, and we keep having them and they keep being supported somehow. And I think part of it is because people become way too included internally and not across the system any. So, and it's
Yeah.
hard. It's complex
So
sometimes and doesn't have right answers sometimes. That's okay. That's okay though.
yeah, let's keep diving into those parts. When I think one of the things that is important to define as we enter the details of the conversation today is, um, what do we define as a system, right? Because with a lot of conversations today in terms of technology, like there are technology systems, or it could be,
Hmm.
you know, tied to processes. But when we are thinking about organization development as a field of applied behavioral sciences, what do we refer to as a system?
Well, I think it's really what I think it is it's the organization as a system, which is an example of a system because there are other systems. But what's common about a system is it's made up of various parts, and I'll use parts as a very generic term. It could be different departments, it could be different expertise, it could be a lot of differences, but it's created as they all are needed for whatever
Mhm.
the reason that organization is put together, whatever the purpose is. That's why the elements are there. Now the elements don't have any need. They don't know what needs they have to work together until they start
Mhm.
to figure out what are the tasks that have to be done, which pieces of expertise need to be included. and
Mhm.
so and so then they build processes and they build other systems that'll actually take care of certain things, like they'll have a system for marketing, or they'll have a system for budget preparing or something. They'll have those kind of systems, call that a small s, and call the whole thing a big S. But it's really always a set of parts that somehow have to work together in order for the purpose to ever be achieved. And I think so. It was turning the organization into a system, and so we can do diagrams of it. And because I worked a lot in org design
Mhm.
actually is a great way to start seeing the organization as a system, because how
Mhm.
we put it together and how we connect the pieces makes a huge difference in how it'll work. So yeah, that's what I mean by it.
Thank you. Thank you for defining that. I think sometimes we use a lot of these terminologies interchangeably, and I think it's great to start differentiating, right, the
Yep.
language of OD,
Yep.
and what we mean by it. And you always say this other phrase, which is our biggest responsibility is to connect people with one another.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which can you expand on that? Because I know when we talk about systems as an organization, there are many components, but the main thing is that it's a lot of humans in that
Yep.
system
Exactly. A lot
that
of
are
systems.
that are trying, and trying to find each other, talk to each other, connect with each other, align with each other. So tell us a little bit of that particular beauty of OD to bring people
Yeah,
together.
that's right. I mean, one of the things that was important when OD started, I think it did not pay attention to the technical side at all. They were into the human system side. And it's because they
Mhm.
followed the World War II era and started in early 50s. And in
Mhm.
essence, what they were trying to do is overcome the command control leadership that had been happening and treating people very poorly. So they kept wanting
Mhm.
to improve to improve the experience for human beings. So at the very beginning, I would say everybody was working more on the human development, the human relationships, and the small groups that needed to work together. That's where everything was. That's where the first theories were in OD. Now, nicely, OD did grow to be more systemic. And by the 70s and 80s, people were doing whole system work and beginning to change organizations. And that's when transformation started to get passed around as something that was happening, except the people who thought they were doing transformation tended to leave the OD organizations and form their own organization because they thought it was different from OD. And
Yeah.
so anyway, that's part of it. But yeah, so part of the issue is, um, tell me again what that question was that we started on.
Talking about how we connect people with one
Yeah,
another, and why is
connecting
that
with people.
a premise of the profession?
Yeah, and so here's the thing. Up until AI and robots, all the people are the ones who took care of communication.
Mhm.
They worked with each other. So it was always true that what we needed to do was build the right connections. And it's like matching dots. Let's say in this system we have lots and lots of different things happening. Which dots are connected and need to be connected? So that's
Mhm.
partly a design question, but it's very much a behavioral question, really. It's, will I
Mhm.
know that my job is to work closely with two other people in this system, because the three of us together are the ones that get the product out the door, let's say, something like that. Or and I mean, there's any number of ways to think about it, but they need to build relationships, they need to build good communication, and if they're in conflict all the time, the performance of that organization is going to be poor. That's all. Because when they can't get that to work together, then everything is slowed down, or everything costs more money, or everything needs to be redone, or whatever. And that is the history of a lot of organizations. There are some who are very efficient, very effective, and they do everything faster than other people do. And I know that what you'll find the way in which the human side of the system is well connected and they work well with each other. And that's part of the goal that we had for years. Not, and we still have that goal. It's just not the only goal. The whole system's effectiveness is important, and this is one very important piece of it.
Okay, so let's get to that part too. I I think it's very, I think very few people know that all these newer, um, I say newer, like 15, 20 years till
Hmm.
now, change management, transformation, Lean Six Sigma, like there's so many,
Yeah.
human centered design, like there's so many variations of
Yeah.
methodologies and approaches that have their roots in OD. And I don't think that's of common knowledge,
That's right.
because everybody's is claimed their territory, right, from a methodology standpoint.
Right.
But I think I always said that this field was way ahead of its time when it started after World War II and all the way
Hmm.
into the 60s and 70s.
Hmm.
And and you got to meet some of the founders, and you became a founder too in a way,
Hmm.
as the field continued to mature through the 70s and 80s and 90s. And I don't think there's a specific appreciation for how visionary the combination of disciplines that conform OD, and the way in which we look at things systematic, and then we have a broad lens of theories and models and things to pull from to be able to understand what's happening in a system and be able to
Yeah.
recognize what interventions are needed, almost as if you are treating a patient. And I've always been fascinated by that, and that works for me personally. So I
Yeah.
feel at home in that space. But I want to make sure that we continue to provide perspective. So I hear and I read a lot of people working in organizational development. And I
Yeah.
remember when I my
Hmm.
very first class, the introduction to OD, our professor, the first thing she said very adamantly was, "You're going to hear organizational development, and that is incorrect. It's
That's right.
organization development.
That's
That
right.
is our legit, that is the legit, name of the field and the practice." And so it's funny when I say that, because I always remember that other voice in the back of my head. But you wrote a very important piece of research, and also journal article about what makes OD OD.
Hmm.
Can you give us your perspective on that? How do you define it? What's important about it? What are the key components, and how does it make a difference,
Yeah.
better than any other discipline?
Well, I wrote that back in 2000, and the more I've thought about it, it's the one thing I still am holding on to and haven't written up yet, and I'm now calling it the essence of OD. What is the core essence of OD? And the reason I'm doing it is because I'm sick and tired of everybody saying what's OD. It's like nobody understands it, and I get tired of it. And part of it is because the field itself has many different specializations in it,
Mhm.
and they seem to subgroup as opposed to stay as a whole. They seem to leave, they're not in the same professional groups anymore and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And no wonder nobody knows what it is, because people do work in organizations and they all call it OD. So
Mhm.
therefore, we don't have a clear picture. And
Mhm.
so what I've started to do is, it's way too late in my career to ever turn around the OD field per se. But I thought it'd
Mhm.
be nice to share something that maybe more and more people might shake their head yes to and say, yeah, that is a way of looking at, if we're really doing OD, we are doing the practices, the concepts, and the theories that are core to OD, that make it different than what? Different than management consulting, different than change management, as it's a certified skill now, and also different from what the coaches do, different from what the trainers do, and probably even different for what some of the process designers do, and the Lean Six Sigma and those kind of people do, because I think they all help us build better organizations. Everybody's intention is to make it
Mhm.
better. In fact,
Mhm.
all the quality work that was done years ago over in Japan and other places and then brought back to the US, that quality stuff has made a lot of organizations really great. So there's nothing wrong with that either. But if that's all you do and you're not working the whole system, you're not building the effectiveness of the whole system. So I think what OD brought in was a strong piece of the human side. And then when social and technical got hooked together with the guys from England who worked at Tavistock, and they wrote all about socio-technical systems, and then we learned a lot about socio-technical systems. I can tell you from that day forward, I have always been in love with the socio-technical model of a system and not just the human system model of a system. Because today we're living with a completely different set of technologies than they were dealing with back in the 60s and 70s. The technology was not anywhere near what we have now. But the concepts they were working on are perfectly valuable today. And they have to do with how do you optimize the fact that every organization is a human and a technical system combined. So how do you optimize the two? And optimize meant that you didn't let the technology overpower the human side, and you didn't let the human side ignore the good value of technology. Now, why would that not be important in 2024? We're sitting on top of it right now, but nobody knows the socio-technical model anymore. They don't even know what they're doing. And I think OD people who learned it were different from the original people who founded it, because Eric Trist and the others who were the best writers about it, they were much more analytical. They were more about taking work systems and work designs, and they were more about analyzing all of the ins and outs of the task work. And that's kind of how they began to think about it. So when and where does the person need to be here, and when does the technology get the work done? And so now that's when people, when a person almost always had to hold the technology because they were tools in those days. They weren't this automatic stuff that's happening now all around us. And so I think that's fascinating. And I would love to bring socio-technical back to people's thinking too. Bill Passmore at Columbia, he's a fan of that, and he wrote some books also on socio-technical work, and he's still alive. The other people have passed. So, but to me, what's important about that is it's another way to think about the system, and to know that when you're starting, you're brought in by a client as a consultant, for example. What the client says they want you to do is often not enough, and it's not exactly correct, but it fits their model of how they look at their organization. That's all. And so we have to walk in, and we have to either talk to some other people or talk to the leader about other people that would need to be involved for it to be relevant and useful. And sometimes they say, well, I don't want to spend more money, and I don't want to take longer having all these people talking about it. And so I think the one thing we didn't do well is we didn't figure out ways to accelerate that work, to help people get more, the right people in. And now I call it start changes with the right people, bring the right people together in the same room, or the same virtual, because we have got to have those people talking to each other, because if they're not talking to each other, they're just living in their siloed world. That's all they're doing. They don't realize that they have a strong connection between them.
So, I mean, I see that playing out in real time as I've also, executed on big transformation
Mhm,
programs,
mhm,
all of them including technology in one way or another. And I've seen a couple of little initiatives speaking up lately, with AI kind of taking off the lead of big, unstoppable transformation, right? I have seen the socio-technical systems approach kind of showing up as an
mhm,
individual
mhm,
methodology or approach, which again, back to the roots, I would love for people to know, like, all these different, approaches have a birthplace here.
yeah.
And if you were to, I want to do like a quick definition from your perspective, and then I also want to transition to what is probably the most fascinating and important part for me, which is that we are a field of value. We are values
Value
based.
field, yeah, that's one of the
There's
essence
nothing we do
pieces.
that doesn't have intentions to bring in humanistic values into the
Right,
organization. So,
right.
can you give us a shortcut definition and then transition into why we are a values based field?
Um, I think because of because of the founders and what people were trying, the problems they were trying to solve had a lot to do with the way in which leadership was practiced and the way in which people, especially people as they joined unions phenomenally during the 30s and 40s.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
part of it was protection. There was protection for the people. So, in some ways, that's why I think some of the unions that we have today have already passed their time. But the reality is they keep finding new things that they can ask for, so they stay as a union. But but what I think was happening is that the values were about the humanistic values in particular were to say how people are treated, how they're respected, how they're how they can belong, how they get in how they get included, and a lot of that stuff didn't come for another 20 years until the diversity stuff began to pick up.
Yeah.
But the word inclusion, I think, comes from our early word that we used to use all the time is participation. We wanted participation.
Mhm.
And so we would try to get the right people to collect data from, or we get the right people to be on the team. And sometimes we had to fight leaders for that because the leader said, well, you can just talk to my top team. That's all you need to know. And I tried that. I did projects that way and they weren't that good.
That still happens, Dave.
So that's what happens. Yeah. So
That
the
still
point
happens.
being, so the point being here, so our values, one of the big values was the humanistic side of it, so that people are treated with some equality or equity,
Mhm.
or they're treated in ways as human beings. They're respected and they're invited in. They're invited in. We want to hear their experience and their knowledge. If we're not hiring good people, then what are we doing with them? If we have these good people there, but we don't really want to include them, there's something wrong. So I think that has carried all the way through right now into the 21st century, because now people in diversity worlds and in conclusion and inclusion worlds, and the new book that Fred Miller and Judith just wrote it's on agency. It says agency is the step after inclusion. In other words, they've
Mhm.
carried this out to a very nice stage, I think. And they're well known as good OD people and good diversity people. Um, so I think what we're talking about here is that the humanistic values is one value set. And there's a couple different listings of OD values. I've always summarized them in four groups. One is the humanistic thinking and humanistic behaviors. So that is, we do
Mhm.
that, but we also train other people to try to be doing the same thing in their system. And then the second one is we are data based. That is, we want data to work with. We don't want opinions to work with. So that if we don't have any data or we don't find any way to collect data, then we are walking in and listening to somebody telling you what the problem is, and probably even telling you what action they want you to take. And there are a lot of consultants, I think, who say yes to that. And it took me some time, but I learned how to say no to that. And I think you have to say no to that, but you also have to build the right relationship with leaders so you two can talk with each other and you can try new ideas. And I think we're sitting right on that today. We're going to need to be doing that better. We're going to be needing to work with the leaders better. And then the third one is being systemic. That is, I mean, I'm sorry, not being, yeah, being systemic is one of the essences. The value I was trying to look for is learning, development, and growth, and that's more on the personal side. So we
Mhm.
wanted people to reach their potential, and so we wanted people to grow and get capabilities by doing the work in OD. And so that was another value that I think is important. And I think it has slipped somewhere along the 70 years that we've been having it. I don't know that we're doing that well enough again. And I today would say we better increase that again, because now people really do need to learn and develop some new things. And then
Mhm.
the last one is the whole system effectiveness is an important value. That is one of our purposes, is to leave the organization in a much more effective role than they were in before. So they're not tripping over each other. They're not conflicting with each other every day. People aren't leaving. Aren't the turnover isn't 40% anymore. People are wanting to stay there. Those are the things that build effectiveness for the whole system. So that's the value based piece. I think that's always there.
Yes, I hear you talk it through. Definitely. I mean, if this is not the time to really lean into those values, I don't know which
I
time
know.
was more adequate. And
I think
I
you're
mean,
right.
you've seen everything, honestly, right? You've been in different
Yep.
big important disruptions,
Yep.
across time, and you've
Yep.
seen change evolve, for humanity, for organizations in so many different capacities. And I'm always curious, when you share perspectives of the main transitions or the main disruptions that you have seen taking place, and what is different from where we were to where we are today to where you think we need to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the things that are changing, I think about change, for example, is in the past, the environment was way more stable and change was not occurring all the time. It happened to be occasional. And the practices got built around that the change was not anybody's job. The people who had jobs were doing tasks for the business. And so when change came around, instead of leaders leading change, they often built a separate team, and it was almost always used a project management approach. And
Mhm.
they send them off and they say, try to solve this for us and bring it back to our organization. That is the way projects were done. And I can tell you there's many times when that's the way I got a project. So then all
Mhm.
I was doing was being added to a project team.
Mhm.
And today, because the changes, the environment on the outside is certainly not as stable. In fact, the futurists like to describe environments in sectors. Today, all the sectors are making changes on a regular basis. Even our
Mhm.
social relationships are changing, and our technology is changing. Our politics are changing. Our economies are changing. You take any of those. So the outside world is constantly affecting our lives. And there's no longer a barrier wall between the organization and the society. All that stuff comes right into the organizations now. So even though we are strategically trying to make a change because we want to go after a new marketplace. So we're trying
Mhm.
to make the internal changes. We're trying to shift our marketing work. We're trying to think about what would happen with the products we need if we get to this other marketplace. We'd have to have some new products and stuff. So it's a nice change model they would have inside to say we're trying to make these changes. But while they're doing it, these other changes are also happening in the organization, and leaders and other people are trying to put up with it because now people don't get along as well with each other in the workplace. And what we have
Mhm.
done is we've added complexity to a lot more complexity to the changes that are happening that we need to deal with. And to me, that is a new era. That is different than when I was out in the field going from different companies to different companies. It was different. So now my thinking is simply we have to think that most of the work we need to do is, in fact, going to be systemic work because it's impacting so many aspects of the organization. So who we gather is going to make a big difference. And if we only work with the people in engineering to change how engineering's done, all we're going to do is disrupt the rest of our system. somebody who relies on engineering. And that's the way I think we need to think about it now. And guess what? It goes back to those early values. It means we have to respect and use the resources we have. We have to bring those people in. We have to invite them in fact, and listen. And for a lot of leaders, that's a little bit hard. But some of them, I notice, some of the younger leaders now are looking like they're doing that very well. They're starting to make a little bit of difference on it. But maybe the ones at the very top are a little more rigid in their old way of thinking. So
Why
yeah.
do you
So
think that is, Dave? Why do you think, why do we continue to struggle, in your opinion, with
yeah. Well,
the separation of leadership values and leadership behaviors between top leaders, middle managers, rising leaders? What is is it generational in your point of view? Is it more that, the higher you go, the more you get accustomed to power, and that kind of changes your wiring?
that's a good
What do you
question.
think happens there?
That's a good question. I think for a lot of people, for some people, it's the power. For other people, it's all connected to their salary and bonuses.
Mhm.
And so if one of the reasons they don't want to experiment or try new things is because they want to do what they've known to do in the past that has always won them better bonuses and better retention. And I think for some of them, it's the way in which we've structured their jobs and their salaries and their bonuses and other stuff. In some ways, that has to be a big driver of some of their behavior. The rest of their behavior is what they've been taught over and over and over again, and what they've been mentored by other people about how to become a good leader in this organization. And some of it is using authority because they don't want to take the time to get consensus. And a lot of times they don't try for consensus. Number three, sometimes they are expected to have the right answers. That is, what we do and what we end up doing comes back to honor you. In other words, your decision was a good decision and it really helped us. And I think if they keep doing that, they're going to fall flat in one of the next 10 years, because it's going to be a different world that they're trying to do a similar thing in that they've done before. And
Yeah.
that would be a shame. So part of it is, so the senior people have a slightly different set of drivers, I think, than, let's say, even a nice middle level manager who has a nice salary, but actually is open to what's going on and is closer to the frontline people and can hear them. And that makes a big difference, I think. And
They're feeling the pain more directly too.
that's true. That's true.
Mhm.
And I think that, I think the whole field of leadership does need a reinvention, but yeah, I don't know
We
how we're
just
going
talked
to.
about that last week with Dr. Cynthia too.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's true. And I think the reason is not so much that they're all bad anymore. I think there's some good leading there, and some people I just met with yesterday that I hope I get another chance to work with were pretty impressive to me. I would really like to work with them and see some leaders, some of whom have been there for 25 years and some of whom are 5 or 6. They sounded really good to me. So I'd love to see how they actually are doing the work. But that's what we need to do, is we need to train. We need more leadership development that'll open up the doors for how they lead. And it'll pay more attention to who is in the workforce today, the generations, the differences, the cultures, the identities that different people try to live in inside of an organization that attempts to make everybody homogeneous, and it doesn't work anymore. So that's the reality, and I think it means the leaders need to have way more openness to understanding and making connections with people who are different from them, and
Yeah.
then they will also be respected as a leader better, I think.
Yeah. I love the fact that you're mentioning that, because again, to my opening remark, I've we belong in two different categories of
Yeah.
generations and race and gender and everything that can be different between us.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that doesn't truly make a difference in how we have come together over the years to
Hmm.
collaborate, whether it is in school, whether it is,
Hmm.
in small projects like this one. And
Right.
we also are part of other communities. And I I find it super important today that we're able to facilitate conversations where this can continue to happen, where we're no longer, as Latina women, women of color, fear engaging
Right.
with white straight man,
Right. Right.
and that Gen Z doesn't fear engaging with the boomer generation, and that Gen X doesn't fear,
Hmm.
right? Like we have all these different categories that we need to break through in order to come together in conversations like this one, because I feel like a lot of the fears and a lot of the common sense will end up coming from the same place of caring
Hmm.
to push things
Hmm.
forward in a lot of cases. And if we're able to tap into that common concern, then we can tap into each other's creativity and be able to open space for dialogue,
Yes.
which is what I've always found really cool with you.
That's good. No, that's really good. And I believe in it completely. I mean, having taught for 40 some years, what I think is I've covered most. I haven't covered the latest generation, I don't think very well, but I think I've covered some of the others. And I
I
don't
have one at home.
Yeah, I know. And I'm not expert at it, but here's all I've done most of my life growing up, because I started as a very young person who was not well accepted, in school. I was smaller, I was shorter, I wasn't as strong, I wasn't as good of an athlete, so it was very hard to become included in the
Mhm.
boys groups. But what I learned a long time ago was I try to be fairly open and not have such a strong opinion that I start to fights with people. And that helped. And I think I can get along with most people who are different. It doesn't mean that we're going to see eye to eye, but I think I can start having the conversation with most people. And I can do so because I don't get reactionary because they say something that I don't like. That's not enough to make me reactionary. And I think it's about
Yeah.
relationships, and I think there's commonality in any relationship that works, no matter age, gender, race. There's some commonalities in that. And I'm certainly not perfect at all. And but I've gotten along with a lot of people, and I want to always do that, because I think that's an important part of this whole thing. And whether I'm doing a
I
project
was
or
gonna mention that.
yeah,
I was gonna say I was gonna mention. I mean, that's typically when you talk about the complexity of the human interactions and what it gets in the way of the actual work and the actual change. I mean, there's a lot of underlying complexity when it comes to these perceptions of each other
yeah, yeah,
that become the elephant in the room, right? And then there's
that's right.
tension, and then there's assumptions, and then there's no way to push through that
Yep.
because there's not a capability to talk about it, to be able to externalize
Right.
those
Yeah, and
experiences.
yep, that's right. And all the stuff about stereotypes that are group stereotypes always. And
Mhm.
everybody says, well, there's always something true about them. But I find half the time not everybody sticks well to their stereotype. And so they may not be actively in that stereotype anyway. And I think if you start with an assumption that you can't tell whether they act and behave like whatever the stereotype says, because I've seen 25-year-olds that sounded to me exactly like people who were 45 and 50-year-olds. So
Mhm.
they were already talking in mature ways. They understood things quite well. Could be the way they handle their education. Maybe there's a lot of things they learn. Maybe some people don't even bother learning some of the stuff. I don't know what it is, but I
Mhm.
could tell that the person certainly didn't fit the stereotype. And and I personally would wish we would stop having a bunch of stereotype biases that we start with, because that's crazy. That's not even giving a person a chance to be a person.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. I agree. You know, one of coming from the perspective of inside the organization, you know this, but a lot of people don't know that I started in OD with the mindset that I still wanted to be a leader. I'm not necessarily an OD practitioner or
Yeah.
OD within HR, or like I've
Yeah.
done my own blend of how to bring OD capabilities into how I
Yep.
participate and lead change in organizations. And what you just said is super dear to my heart too, and that throughout the years I have seen the the sad dehumanization of the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it from misunderstanding stereotypes or falling into categories, and this whole in-group out-group dynamics of who gets to get in and who gets excluded for no reason whatsoever.
Right.
um you know as painful as it is to be excluded, we don't talk about this enough, but feeling excluded actually has
Mm-hmm.
it's painful as if it was physical pain, as demonstrated on MRIs and studies that have been done.
That's
In
right.
it's one of the most excruciating experiences, yet it's so common, and it's
Oh, I'm
so
sure.
common that we come together against a common enemy, whether we realize it or not, and then we get to dehumanize that person without, like you said, giving that person a chance to show up and to allow to be seen and to allow to be in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something I've observed accelerating, across the years. I think the pandemic made it even more
Oh yeah.
amplified.
Yeah.
And today, with AI and all these amazing but still shiny objects that people are trying to understand, we are forgetting that this is all we have. Like, it is, our intrinsic value as human beings, and who we are and what we bring to the organization
That,
and how we treat each other. um, and I feel
that's
like there is a lot conversation, but there's not enough capability
yeah.
to make it actual happen.
I think that's so true. And an example that kept coming to my mind as you were talking um, not only the way the biases continue to run, and our HR
Mhm.
departments that I can tell aren't doing much to change those biases. In fact, they probably can't speak negatively to the leaders who are running it.
Yeah.
So they feel kind of boxed in. But the same thing is true of, if we're trying to understand the people, the way in which recruitment has changed completely. I'm concerned about it, because you have to pass all the AI stuff before anybody will ever talk to you and find out what kind of a person you are. And I'm afraid by the time it gets there, there's might be some very good people who have been chucked out. But the managers don't want to take the time to be doing that many interviews or whatever. But if you're hiring somebody who you're going to respect and you're going to include and you're going to help use in decisions and stuff, then you should care personally about who you're hiring, and
Yeah.
not just getting a plate full of stuff from HR and saying, well, you can pick one of these people. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know, that I'm answering that in a system way, because what I'm saying is there's a particular part of that system that is created a different way in which people get hired now. And so now managers may be happy with it, or they may not be. I really don't know. But if they're not happy with it, then that's not going to help them include people differently or respect them or treat them differently or anything. It's going to just keep the same old thing going on. And
Yeah.
that would be a
I
shame.
think the recruiting conversation, I think, is an episode of its own, especially with the job market being so brutal.
Mhm.
Now, especially this year, end of
Yeah.
last year and all this year, with not only the layoffs, but the amount of people who are out in the market that just cannot get through the recruiting process,
Hmm.
and trying to figure it out, behind the scenes, how to jump hoops to get
Yep.
to somebody who can connect them to somebody who can refer them to somebody, and or going through rounds and rounds of interviews just to know they were just in the pool to check the
Right.
box because
Right.
somebody else had already been picked
Right.
already.
Right.
And so, but I feel like that's a whole topic of its own. And
Yeah.
I want to, so let's take a tiny step back to take two steps forward. So
Okay.
we were talking about leadership. We even, with the stereotyping and perceptions of each other and this whole part of the human system side of
Mm-hmm.
things.
Mm-hmm.
Another big component of OD that makes it different, which I know you study and research and teach about, is use of self.
Yes. Yes.
Um, would you share your
Yeah.
perspective? What is use of self, and how is it important as an OD fundamental?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it has been shared around OD for a long time. It has also been taught in various using various phrases in clinical psychology. Some because they wanted therapists to be able to deal with that, and they also had a few. They also had a few other places where teachers have been taught a little bit about use of self. I mean, I studied all that at the very beginning, but frankly, it was way more important and way more central in OD, in the way people shared it in OD. The problem is there was very little literature written about it in the early years. People passed it on. They taught people, but they passed it on. So when I partnered with Mian Chung Judge, a very successful global consultant in OD, and someone who has taught a lot of people in the field. And she used to teach all the certifications for OD people in that was run out of England for a long time. And she had written some things about use of self too. So we got connected by a mutual friend of ours, a guy who knew both of us, and said, "You two should talk." Well, we talked, and we really got along well. She's one of the best partners I've ever worked with. She tells you the truth. She's very smart. She has good ideas, but she also listens to whoever she's working with as a partner. So we got along quite well. And we decided what she was thinking about when we first met was there's no research whatsoever about use of self. No one knew anything of it. So we agreed to do the first research study, and we made it a global study which ended up being very powerful in some ways. And and there's a lot that we learned from it. But what it was about really was 42 countries, 900 people. I mean, it was a beautiful research. It had all the stats that it needed. But what was important was we were asking people a lot of questions, some open-ended questions about what they thought use of self was and how they used their self, and also the ways in which they developed themselves and how they took care of themselves. And those were all open space ones. Then the items that we had them do on a survey were came from our research literature, what our literature review. We did a big literature review of whatever the psychologists had said about it, the sociologists had said about it, and we made the items from that. And then we factored all we factored all those things into which ones actually were connected together through the study, and we ended up with 5 major areas that people would work on. And what that did was the first time it was naming some things that people could work on that were part of what in fact the people became that became the 5 factors in which they had higher and lower scores. Okay. So everybody had higher and lower scores across that, and countries had higher and lower scores on that. And so
So
that's
if you were to summarize in like a 30-second summary,
yeah,
what would you say are the main things people need to know in terms of the importance of use of self, and what are those 5
yeah,
attributes?
yeah. The ability to cognitively and emotionally flex in challenging situations. That was one.
Mhm.
Another one was relational behaviors. That is, everything goes through the relationship. So how well you build the relationships was very important. Um, there was another one called self-management. We named them. So, I mean, they were called self-management, but what it meant was the way in which we manage our own emotions, our own reactions, and our own difficulties. So
Mhm.
self-management was another one. And, and another one was how we handle dynamic situations where we have to make changes to what we started with. So there was
Mhm.
certain items that all clumped together in the factor analysis that made that bring come together. And and then there was one on the last one was um, um, what how my best use of self shows up. So it's how does my best use of self shows up. So the real way to think about it is no matter where we start, we're in the middle of our lifetime movie. Okay. We start wherever we start. And anybody can start this, and you can start thinking about, what do I know? What is my awareness? What do I know about myself? How can I improve some of that so I'm more wise about who I am and how I act, how I react, and what I do, and all that. So and so it's a matter of then getting people to begin to think about what things they don't know about themselves, which means you have to get some trusted feedback from other people. And that's very
Mhm.
important. And most people don't ever get it. They get it from friends who don't tell them the truth sometimes, or sometimes the leaders don't hear any honest feedback. Nobody will tell them. So,
Mhm.
so this is part of the problem. So we may have our own awareness, but it's not enough. It's part of the picture. And then the last part is our behavioral choices. How do we choose to behave in every situation we're in? So let's
Mhm.
say we're a leader, and one time we're speaking to a group, another time we're listening to our boss, another time, what is my intention of my role? What behavioral choices do I have when I'm here? Should I speak a lot? Should I shut up? What should I do? And we
Mhm.
make those choices based on other things that drive us. That is what we think is best, what we think we know, and also um, sometimes the things that are fearful or vulnerable to us, we might stay away from them. We might not deal with those very well. And if we improve any one of those things I just mentioned, if we improve them, we can be our better self. We can keep coming
Yeah.
up as a better self. And that's the goal for all of it. And I think it takes a lifetime because you'll always keep learning.
Yeah.
But you can start that picture anywhere you want. And I've worked with people in their 20s and people in their 60s, and they're all having fun working on use
And
of
you're
self.
and you're always starting in the middle of the movie, wherever you start.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So you've already had a lot of history, and
Yeah.
and it's great when people can self-reflect and start to understand and learn from their past experiences too, because that's the other piece of learning. That, along with feedback, are the two ways we get to know who we are.
Excellent. Dave,
Yeah.
we have about 2 minutes left, but I pulled up a comment from one of the people in the audience that says,
Hmm.
yes, use AI to enhance and to help, but not to replace the human element. You just
Right.
came back from an AI conference in Jamaica,
Yes, I did. I did.
AI NOD,
Yeah.
and I think that we should wrap up with your perspective of what you learned there that was
Yeah.
impactful to
Yeah.
you, and your recommendation really was the call to action for us,
Okay.
as humans, as OD practitioners, as anybody driving change. And
Yeah.
again, we have 1 or 2 minutes left, so
Okay.
we may need
Okay.
to wrap it up a little quickly.
Well, I mean, I learned stuff that I didn't know about, people who were very expert on AI. I'm very impressed with all the things that AI is starting to do. That's really very positive for our world. Um, and how good they can be at finding things. They're helping with medical develop or with medicine developments and stuff now. And I think some of that's really good. The other concern that was widely shared at this conference was it has to have an ethical practice go with it. And right now, no one's very sure that there's an ethical practice built in, because the people who are doing all this work come from their own professional perspective. And that what they won't know, and this is back to use of self, they won't know their unconscious biases very well because they're less conscious. And so they can be built into algorithms, and we don't know exactly how it's going to sit or affect other people who are using it. So that whole ethical piece is a very important piece. And so where do we need to go, or where do we need to pay attention? I'm becoming a new fan of really trying to redo leadership some, whether it's through leadership development or whether it's through other ways. But I do not think what people are studying in universities is teaching people about leadership anymore. I really don't think it's not into this era yet. It's still the same textbooks that we've been reading before. And then number two is I think we need people who either come from, potentially HR could be helpful in this, but also OD people for sure, and people with strong human ethics, so that they could be more connected to the people working on AI. Maybe it's in the small companies that they're working in, or maybe it's the big Amazons, and Amazon could put some of those people together. But we know that people are spending billions daily now on AI development. And I'm just concerned that there's a perspective that's getting left out potentially. And that's what some people at the conference were talking about too. So yeah, it's what we need to do, and we need to be more inclusive. I think now's the time. I love what Fred Miller and Judith Katz just recently wrote, the book called It's About Agency, but they worked on diversity forever. Then they worked on inclusion forever and realized we're still not getting anywhere. And they're suggesting that agency is the answer. And I think what's nice about that simple statement is simply, when we have inclusion, we've brought diversity people in, but we haven't yet had them belong. We haven't had them full participating and having the agency to speak up and use their skills. And if that can happen, then we use our resources way better than we usually do. So,
oh my gosh, we could go on for hours. I've been listening you talk now for like 15 years, and I still always learn something new. And I feel so privileged to have you here on my small LinkedIn live, sharing your knowledge and educating the people that I have in my network. I see a huge potential for OD to rebirth. I think this is the time for this profession to blossom, if we were to really embed this knowledge in the different capacities in an organization. And I know we have, just for the people watching, I put a link to an article that a common colleague to Dave and I, Ed Kang, wrote today. My apologies. Wrote today about a global OD community that is forming, that is intended to take the field to the next state of practice, to what we need today and how we can make a difference. So if anybody's interested to join, you're welcome to do that. So Dave, we're gonna have to say goodbye for now. But do you have any parting words you want to end us with?
I appreciate you inviting me to this. I loved having the conversation with you, and you're right. There's so much more to talk about, but there's that much more to do as well. So I hope that we can all turn our thinking into action somewhere and make a difference in the world. And I have fewer years left than you do, but I know you're going to do a lot. So.
Oh my God, passing the baton.
Yeah, I know.
All right. Well, I will see you around, Dave. And to everybody watching, thank you so much for sticking around and for joining us in this conversation. I will see you again soon.
Thank you.